Uh, Everybody would be interested in knowing how queues work in Orchestrator. Even I'm quite fascinated to learn about it. Is because tried couple of times queues and you don't need to worry about you know tracking your entire transaction status and also works quite good. Uh, Murli, let this session start. You would get your recorded sessions too. Don't worry about it. All right. Cool. So, welcome all. Let's quickly start the session. I am joined with NISARG. You all know about NISARG. Just to give you a formal sort of an introduction for the people who have joined new. NISARG is a senior consultant with CRG Solutions, has been contributing to the community for a long time now. The recent sort of an achievement for NISARG, NISARG is now a chapter lead for Mumbai community. So in case if there is any community event that needs to be performed in Mumbai, you could anytime reach out to NISARG and he'll be glad to help you. So that's one achievement with NISARG recently. Yeah. Quickly jumping on to queues. Nisarg, yeah, thanks, Philip. So, Nisarg, yes, let's quickly jump on to Orchestrator. Uh, Let us know how are we taking this ahead and how are we going to get appraised about queue is what even I am interested to know. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, SHRIPPAD. Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. Hey, hi. I hope you all are able to hear me properly. Good evening. Today, we are going to discuss about UiPath Orchestrator Queue, which is, in mine also favorite topic because UiPath Orchestrator Queue is something which makes Orchestrator very interesting and a lucrative offer in terms of automation transactional handling. So before we jump in, till now we have covered how Orchestrator connects with UiPath Studio, and we have seen assets, we have seen triggers, and we have seen a lot of functionalities. And now we are jumping on UiPath Orchestrator queues. So UiPath Orchestrator is nothing but a heart of your automation management, which gives you power of provisioning, deploying, trigger, monitor, and basically track everything about your robots. Which with Orchestrator, now you can orchestrate from your bot from your mobile device also as an application, which is available in Android and iOS. So that we have covered in the previous sessions. So SHRIPPAD, let's get started with UiPath Orchestrator queues, and let's set up the today's topic.
Yeah, so thanks, Nisar. Before I start the session, okay, I'm going to unmute all is because today it's going to be quite an interactive session because we both are tired of talking and we want your support too. So quite few questions would be asked by Nisarg or by me on what is your understanding around it, so that we could steer the entire discussion towards it. So I'm going to unmute you all for maybe a couple of minutes so that would like to understand a basic question. Okay, what is according to you a queue? Okay, I'm just going to unmute all of you now. Uh, yes, all participants are unmuted. You can take your shot. What is queue according to you? Okay, and what do you think is going to happen when you enable queues or when you work with queues? Give it a shot, guys. Okay, be waiting. In fact, I've unmuted everyone, so whoever wants to go ahead. Or is it like a fresh topic for you all? Anything, guys? Is anybody talking or something? I think we have Dilip on the line. So Dilip, what do you think is a queue, or what's your understanding around queue?
Dilip
Is
has
there?
posted on chat, it seems.
I'm sorry.
Dilip has posted on chat, it seems. He says, I can't unmute. I think we have to enable the option of unmute.
Yeah. I have unmute all. Yeah.
Hey. Hi, Shripad. Hi, NISARG.
Hi.
So
Hi.
basically, I feel the queue is one integral part of any system wherein we start putting one request behind the other. It can be in simple terms. It can be like I want to have my food, so I start preparing one after the other. So that's the queue which falls in line. Just like that in automation, I think we want to run 3-4 bots, so it goes one behind the other in queue, like the first in first out. So I feel that is how queue could be defined. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. So that's a holistic approach about in a queues in terms of a data structure, and you're right on point, Dilip.
Thank you.
Okay. That's wonderful, Dilip. Abhilash, I have unmuted you too. Do you want to add something, buddy?
Yeah, hi Shripad. Hi everyone. So hi Nisar.
Hi, Abhilash.
Yeah. So actually it's like just like a load balancer which acts as based on our priority. So if we are running 3-4 modules at a time, so based on our priority, we just add the priority queue onto the load balancer, that is the queue item. So it the computer at that the bot at that time understands how the how the process should be prioritized and what should be enabled first. Like if some process is going on, if a high process priority comes in, so it is given priority in the queue. So it is how the queue item works.
Okay, that's a wonderful explanation. In fact, Abhilash, I think next time if we get a chance, you could tag along with Nisarg talking
Yeah,
about UiPath then.
definitely.
Sure. Actually, I am much into automation anywhere, so I am very much interested for UiPath as well.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah,
So Nisarg, on to
thank you
you.
so much.
No problem. Thank you so much. Nisarg, on to you now. Guys, I'm going to unmute all of you now. Okay. So in case if I'm not able to mute you all as a discipline, if you could just go on mute, that would be wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Shripad, you have muted me also. Yeah. Okay. So talking about queues, as per my understanding, so queue holds unlimited number of items. Now the queue is nothing but a sort of a data structure here where you can store multiple data, or that each and individual data is called as a transactional. Now, whenever we talk about transactional processing, we think about integrating it with SAP, Salesforce, invoice processing, or something like that. And that basically the information which has to be stored as one element or item as a part of a queue is a transaction. Queue in UiPath is a free form by default. So you can store any number of elements in one transaction, and also you can store any number of item in a particular transaction. So it could be integration of integers, string, and boolean altogether. So queue is basically a free form which is default, given by UiPath Orchestrator.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good, Nisarg. Thank you so much. I'm going to quickly jump on next one. So you have cleared the basic concept of queue in Orchestrator. What I would want to understand is, what are the different ways of adding data in queue, or maybe how would you create a queue? Let's start from that. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, let me start with the demonstration. I like to give demonstration of each and everything, So I'll go to Orchestrator first of all. So this is my Orchestrator instance. Now in my Orchestrator instance, as you can see, we have queues under automation folder. You just have to click on queue and you can see your queue name here. Now in my Orchestrator, as of now, there's only one queue. So in order to, I'll just delete it. In order to add a queue, you simply first, before pushing or adding items in a queue or transactions in a queue, basically, you have to create a queue first in Orchestrator, because queue is not will not be automatically created. That is the first point which we should remember while using while creating a process. We can't just give a name which is not available in UiPath Orchestrator, and it will not add elements or transactions in queue. We have to create a queue. So we just come to this page, click on add button, and I name it as, let's say, demo queue. Now, once I enter the name, I just simply say add, and that's it. A new queue has been created. Now, for answering your question about what are the ways in which we can add items in queue, is there are multiple ways. Now, for that also, I have created a simple workflow for today's demonstration, where I'll be showing you how we can add elements into queue. So to add element or add transactions in queue, we generally do it from UiPath Studio while we are executing a particular process in a dispatcher workflow. Now, basically in that, what we do is we just type queue here in the activities, and we have two activities, which is add queue item and add bulk queue items. So using these two activities, we can add transactions to our queue, which we have created in UiPath Orchestrator. Now, the first example is, let's say I have an array. In my array, there are three values, which is value 1, value 2, value 3. Now, what I do is I have this array. I'm just going to loop it through for each loop, and I'm going to add each and every value one by one using add queue item activity, where I have to mention name of my queue, which is nothing but a demo queue. And in collections of item information, I just have to pass item, which is an attribute of my for each loop. And once I add that, when I execute this particular workflow, let's say I just say run. Now there are no elements in this particular queue because we have just created it. When it executes, I just refresh and see the transactions. So I get 3 data, which is added in particular queue. So this is how I simply add elements, or you can say transactions, in queue. Now, another way, most of the times we have data in CSV format or Excel format. So for adding those data, where there is not only one value in one transaction item, there could be multiple values in one transaction. In that scenario, how we are going to add this particular data. For that also, I have created one demo. So let's say demo queue. I'm just keeping name constant because I have created it all already, so I don't want to spend more time on that. Now, for adding multiple data from Excel, I'm just going to read this Excel in a data table, and I'm going to pass that data table in a loop to add queue item. And in the item information, I'm going to pass each and every element from row as a data state. Now, this all data of one row is going to be one transaction. Now, instead of talking, let me just show you. So I'm just going to execute it, run. And once I execute it, it's done. I just go ahead, refresh. Now, as you see, it took a little bit of time. It took 8 seconds to add the items from Excel to queue. If you go ahead and if you view transaction, you can see all the data has been added to Orchestrator queue. So this is another way, SHRIPPAD, of adding the data to queue. And then the last way, I'm not going to demonstrate it, I'm just going to explain it. So you can read Excel into a data table, and if you don't want to waste enough time, you just say bulk add queue item, and you pass the data table to the queue name, and that simply adds entire data table into Orchestrator queue. And each and every transaction will be containing all the items from your row, which is called as a specific data in UiPath Orchestrator transaction or queue transactions. And the final way of adding data in queue would be just click on the more options and say upload item, and then select a CSV file from the available options and simply say open. And it simply says successful 16 rows have been found, and I can say upload. It automatically uploads all the data in my queue as transactions. So these are the 4 ways in which we can add data or transactions in a orchestrator queue. I hope I'm clear with that, Shripad.
Yeah, quite clear. So if I have to summarize what I have understood is, if you look going ahead and uploading data in queues, okay, the first one is you could use it with array, okay, that is one way you could do it. You could go on to your studio activities and use add queue items, okay, in which you can go ahead and add queues through Excel. All right.
Right.
You could use bulk add queue item, which will go ahead and add all the transactions as a bulk queue.
Right.
And if that doesn't work, okay, or you don't want to work that way, then you could directly go into queues and upload an Excel sheet, wherein it will be a CSV sheet, for example, a CSV workbook, and that will parse into the number of rows and take that as the transaction item. Is that
Yes,
correct?
exactly. And any data which is
Mhm.
enumerable data can be uploaded to your orchestrator queue. Or
Mhm.
even if it's not an enumerable data, you can create that data as enumerable data. Let's say array, queue, anything that you want in a format of enumerable, and you can pass it to queues.
What is this terminology that you just used right now?
So
Innumerable.
enumerable, yeah,
Yeah.
enumerable is a terminology in a data structure which gives you idea where a data, what you can say, a data does not hold only single value; it holds multiple value. Now, when we talk about list, when we talk about array, when we talk about list of emails, when we talk about list of, let's say, file addresses or list of PDFs. So anything which is in a list format or array format or multiple data is enumerable data.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So this is now clear that you know how we can go ahead and add data in queue. Okay.
Yes.
To be very honest, I'm still also learning UiPath. Okay, and I would be better be clear about it. I see a lot of activities in Studio when I click on or type in queue. Okay,
Right.
uh, I'm confused. What happens over here? So thanks to you, you have explained to us that add queue item is used to add queue items, bulk is to add bulk items. Okay,
Right.
but I see numerous over there. Okay, uh, would you be able to help giving us a sort of a brief on what each item would do? Okay, that would really help a lot, so that if I'm clear about an activity to be used, then I think my development and my coding practice would also improve. Unless until I don't know what an activity does, it becomes very difficult to use it. So if you could really help us uncover what each does, it would really help. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely, Shubhat. So the first thing before we jump on to the queue activities is that your UiPath Studio should be connected to UiPath Orchestrator instance, and then only you can see those activities in your studio. Otherwise, you would be searching for queues, from our audience, and you would not get such activities as I'm getting. That means your studio is not connected to the orchestrator. Now, for that, you can jump back to the session one and you can go through the session one to connect your local machine with the orchestrator. Now, to answer your question, Shripad, so you have a wonderful point here because we have a lot of activities and we don't know how exactly we can utilize them while we are processing with a transactional oriented workflow.
Yeah.
So this explains very clearly in UiPath RE framework. However, we are not jumping on RE framework as soon because it's a lot of technicality, and we'll jump on to that session coming in upcoming sessions. So in RE framework, the flow goes in such a way for any transactional process is that first of all you divide your workflow into a dispatcher and a performer.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Again, an alien like words for me. Dispatcher and performer reminds me of dispatcher reminds me of Amazon. What's happening around? So not related to these concepts. So if you could tell me what is dispatcher, what is performer, okay, that would really help. Okay, because
Exactly.
is it like creating two different bots, or is it part of one bot itself? and what does dispatcher do and what does performer do and how it is related to queue activities also. Yeah.
Yes. So dispatcher and performer is nothing like a terminology in UiPath. However, as a best practice of development purpose, most of the developers rename their workflow as a dispatcher and performer in terms of understanding. Now, dispatcher is basically here is something where you add data to UiPath Orchestrator queue. Now, adding of the data is not a simple process. It's not just like getting the data from queue or list or Excel and just adding it to queue. It could be collecting data first of all, scraping the data from some variable or some website of retail, or performing some machine learning operations to capture the data, or fetching the data from database. So these all are the features which can be included in dispatcher, where we collect the data and we upload the data into UiPath Orchestrator queue as a transactions. So that is nothing but a dispatcher. Now, as you have mentioned, we can separate this dispatcher and performer as a different bot altogether if we want to utilize in that way, and we can run dispatcher on another machine and performer on another machine. We can do that but it has to be on central orchestrator where queue is defined, right? Now, in a performer, what you do is basically you utilize the queue where all the transactions have been added, and then perform your process on each and every transaction, complete the transaction. Now, for the dispatcher, when you're adding the data, you mostly utilize add queue item and bulk queue item. You also end up adding add transaction item, which is the runtime adding of the transaction. When your process is running and when you find out a new data, when you just add the data in a queue, it becomes automatically in progress. But adding queue item and adding bulk queue item makes the status as new. As you can see in the demo queue which we have created, so when we added the data, all the statuses is new. So this new is because I have utilized the activity which is add queue item. However, if I use add transaction item, it would make my transaction as in progress automatically. Now, once your dispatcher is done, you jump on to performer. Now, when you're talking about performer, you have to get the data from orchestrator queue. Now, when we are talking about getting the data, that means we are fetching the data from orchestrator queue. And in terms of fetching the data, you need get queue items and get transaction item. Now, get queue items will get all the transactions from a particular queue immediately in a enumerable data. Now, we already know what enumerable data is. We can loop through the data and we can go through each and every data, and the data will be fetched from UiPath queue as a queue item. However, in get transaction item, we are fetching one transaction at a time. Now, if you see, I have created a demonstration for a performer when I'm fetching only single transaction. I'm fetching the transaction, I'm mapping the local data with the transaction values or the specific content, processing the transaction, and then I'm again fetching the new transaction or the next transaction. So this is, in this way, the first step of the processor would be to get the transaction item. Once you get the transaction item, you might need to set the progress of the particular transaction. Now, progress means when you're processing this transaction, what exactly is happening? Because sometimes a single process for single transaction can take up to 30 minutes or 45 minutes. I'm just talking about a hypothetical scenario where it takes more time for one process, for processing one transaction. Now, at that time, you might have to track down the progress, what exactly is going on in the queue. So while tracking down the progress, you just have a person who is tracking down the progress might go in queue in a particular transaction, which will be in progress. And then he'll just go to view details. He'll just go to the history and he might go to comments. In the history, he'll immediately identify what exactly is currently going on in the transactional by set transaction progress. Now, for giving a demonstration, I have utilized the set transaction progress in this workflow to set that done till last name. So this explains that that my last name has been processed and now still the next further process is going on. So this doesn't indicate that the process is completed. I hope you are with me, Shripad.
Totally.
Right. So this is the activity which we use for tracking down the exact progress of a particular transaction before it completes. Now, once the transaction is completed, now once we are done with all the processing and once we reach out to the page where we want to, we have submitted and we are now going ahead with the next transaction. Before that, you have to set the transaction status from Studio. this transaction status is not going to set automatically. This is the first point which everybody misses out while using the orchestrator queue. So if you set transaction status as successful, so you can set it in two ways. You can set either successful or failed. And for failed also, you have two more options. But as of now, I'm submitting here as a success. So once my process is done, I'm submitting my transaction as a successful. And once it is successful, it is going to go ahead and get the next transaction status.
Okay.
That's a lot to take.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think you covered most of the activities over here. Just one thing is what is missed out is what I believe is wait queue item. Okay.
Right.
Uh, and the postpone transaction item. Yeah.
Yes.
I think these two are missed out. Do you think these are regularly used, and what could be their definition and how it can be used?
Exactly. Your understanding is correctly right. So get transaction item and wait queue item is not regularly used. It is not mandatory while we are working on an orchestrator queue. So postpone transaction item is something which you think if you find you go through a scenario where you might have to postpone this particular transaction item to a future date, right? Or tomorrow, let's say, then you can utilize this activity just to increase the time or the postpone the deadline of a particular transaction. But make sure that postpone transaction item cannot postpone the time of your transaction to be processed beyond deadline.
Okay.
If your deadline is tomorrow 7 o'clock, then you can't postpone it to tomorrow's 8 o'clock. You have to postpone it before 7 o'clock. So deadline is something which is a restriction for postpone transaction item activity. Now, basically, deadlines are not there by default. That also we have to give. And as you have just popped up that question, so that reminds me to go back and tell you, in add queue item activity, we have a feature of adding postpone and deadline. Now, this deadline is something which sets something like a SLA for your particular queue, that if I'm adding this transaction, then it should be processed before this particular time. So let's say, as a best practice, what we do is det dot now dot add. Now you can add days, add hour, add milliseconds, minutes, months, and years also. So let's say I say add days and I say add 2 days. So within 2 days, this particular transaction has to be processed. Otherwise, this transaction will go in a, this will not be used. It will be failed. It will be discarded. We can't use that beyond deadline. So this is something which is setting up like a SLA for the particular queue item or transaction.
Okay.
And postpone is a property which you can postpone the particular usage of a transaction. So before postpone, you can't use this particular transaction. You can't process the transaction. You have to use before, after postpone, and before deadline. So this is basically something like a limit of time for utilization of your queue. Sorry, transaction.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah.
Got you. So I think wait queue item is one which is missed out.
So wait queue item is basically a new activity which recently has been added, and this activity exactly what it does is that it allocates your particular it pings verifies whether your queue item or your queue has a transaction which is not processed, which is a new or which is in progress. So it just verifies, and if it will return your status whether there is a in pending or in progress transactions in a queue. If there is not, then you can go ahead with dispatcher and add more queue items to that. So it is just like a basic verification check whether there is an in progress transaction or not. So that is why wait queue item is used, but it is not mostly used. It is a rarely used scenario.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nisar, for covering all of the activities. Now comes the hero of the entire queue. Okay, is because this is where the entire problem starts. If a particular item in the queue is failing, okay, uh, how am I supposed to manage that exception? Okay, that is very critical to be known. Okay, at this juncture is because with these I can start putting the transaction item in the queues. But tomorrow if they are failing, what am I supposed to do? Exception handling is very important to ensure that your process automation is really effectively being delivered. So would you like to take us through that particular journey also? Yeah.
Sure, sounds good. So yeah, right point. Because setting up successful status is very easy because we are just going with the process and we are setting up a status as successful.
Yeah.
However, when we tend to handle the scenario of exception, in that case, we have to think about both the scenarios, a business exception and a system exception. So before I explain this, I would like to know from our audience, what is your understanding about business exception and system exception, and how would you classify a particular exception in business or it's a system exception? So Shripad, if you can unmute people or give them access to unmute themselves.
I've done the needful, so you all can speak now.
So I hope you have got the question. How can you classify a exception in a business exception and a system exception? What your understanding would be about this two exceptions? Anyone?
Come on, guys, give it a shot. It cannot be a big silence, guys. We might have to pick up. I think Priya, Vaibhav, Swagasmini, Jena. I think you guys really have worked on these. Raj, Vikas. I don't want to pick my friend Dilip. He's very near and dear to me. Might ask a next question which is very out of the box. So I don't want to touch Dilip. So yes, who wants to go ahead? Well, what is your thought about it? That's really important. Is because that's the understanding that we would get.
Abhilash says he's not able to unmute himself.
Hello.
Hey, hi.
Yeah, can I tell the difference between business
Yeah.
exception and system exception?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, business exception is nothing but if we get the wrong input. I mean, if in Excel there is no data,
Mm-hmm.
or if business data is something error, like if you want to enter phone number, but there are special characters in that phone number, then that will be considered as a business exception.
Right.
And in system exception is nothing but if application crashes unexpectedly
Right.
or any new screen appears, then it will be considered as a system exception.
Perfect. Perfect.
Any more?
Any more? So guys, do you want to add up to this point? I think Uday just gave an answer, right?
Yeah.
The transactional data which we are using, if there is any issue with that transactional data with respect to applications input or extraction, whatever, then you have a business exceptions. And if that particular system or an application is not responding due to network connectivity or your screen resolution or its navigations are not present, so you are not able to basically perform a task on the application which you are in scope, then you get system suspension.
Sounds good. So that's a total different aspect, Perfect.
Yeah, because that was really fantastic. Okay. Uh, always there is something new to learn from you, mate. Thank you so much. Lipsha, I'm trying to unmute you, but unfortunately you have uh, muted yourself, so it's not helping.
So
There
hi,
you go.
Shripad.
Yeah,
Hi,
hi.
who's that?
As per my understanding, business exception arises when the exception occurred due to human error, any type of human error, like when we are providing some data from our side, the user have done some error, then it can be considered as a business exception.
Okay.
Shripad, she is using your terminology of human error.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just an example he has given, which one I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You're right on point.
Fantastic. I think there was another champ of ours who was trying to talk, but I think we missed him.
Yeah, hi
Abhilash.
Shripad, I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Abhilash. Yeah.
Yeah. So business exception falls under like during the requirement gathering phase, if we have captured the all the validations, the positive and negative scenarios. So based on that, if we go and code it over there in any RPA tool, so if the exception falls under those coded categories, so that is what I treat as business exceptions. So maybe it falls under the positive or the negative scenarios. So that is one, like validation, annotations, email verification, phone number, those kind of, these are small examples. And system exceptions are like any unexpected scenarios that come up or pop up during the bot execution, like in case any button changes its control ID, or any parameter got changed and the tool gets completely failed over there. So that is what due to the system glitches. So that is would be considered as the system exceptions.
Perfect. So Abhilash, you have picked up the word out of my mouth, where I was just going to tell that
Thanks.
yeah, that business exception. I was just going to mention the same thing. Business exception is captured during requirement gathering, and that is the most important factor.
Yeah,
While
it's the
we,
most vital phase.
exactly, vital phase when we are actually taking all the requirements, all the understanding from SMEs of a process, and we are taking down the all the process and understanding of the process. So then and themselves, we have to understand what are all the fallback mechanisms we might have to consider in case of failure. So we all have shared our thoughts, and everybody is correct about this. So this is all about business exception. Now, the track which I wanted to set here is that business exception, we all know this is going to happen, and we all anticipated it, and that's why we are throwing that particular error into a business exception. I'll show you how we can set it up. But also, business exception cannot be retried in UiPath Orchestrator queue. Now, why is that? Because you already have anticipated it and you have already known the exception. So once you throw the exception, it automatically captures the log of a particular exception and it attaches with the transaction. And the transaction is not retried because you don't have to retry a exception which you already anticipated. Now, system exception has to be retried. Now, in the same place, I have a question, or I can just tell you that. So when you get a system exception, that means application crash, that means browser crash, or anything which happens out of the box which is not expected, it automatically throws a system exception. And definitely, as a best practice of a development, we have to retry particular system exception. So same in UiPath Orchestrator queue, we have a functionality to retry a particular exception which is occurred due to system exception, and that is set. The number of retries which you can attempt maximum on a particular data to retry the data is where you actually creating queue. So when you're creating a queue, you click on add, you see there's a maximum retry number. So by default, this number is 1, and maximum number of retries you can put 50. But if you try to put 51, it says the value should lie between 1 to 50. So ideally, it is maximum retry number is 2. But for such some scenarios of banking or such critical workflows, we have to set it to 3 or 5 based on the requirement from client that a single transaction should not be missed at all. Every transaction has to be processed no matter what. If it's a system exception, it has to retry no matter what. So take your number of times or number of attempts. I hope you are with me, Shripad, on this. Shripad,
Yep.
I lost your video. Yeah, okay, I have it. So that's about the retry mechanism of a particular transaction. Now, how do we set it up? So when you are throwing, now I'll give you a quick example of that. So when you have a process, when you process a particular transaction, then you utilize this activity which is set transaction status, and you say status as successful and transaction as trans item. You mentioned the transaction item here, which will automatically set a transaction item status as successful. However, if you have a system exception, so what you do is you add a particular system exception in a catch. In the catch, you catch the system exception and you throw failed status along with the error type. Now UiPath has given you a beautiful functionality which you don't have to hard code the coding here. You just have to simply select the error type from a drop down and you have to give the reason for that. So I say business application exception, or let's say business exception, and I will print the exception message here, which will automatically set the log of a particular exception. Now if it's a business exception, that is not going to get retried. If it's a system exception, you can application exception, you can mention the reason and you can retry that. Now, if you want to retry system exception also, sorry, business exception also, then what you can do, instead of setting up the status, before setting up status, you can actually retry particular property or retry another way, fallback mechanism for this particular process, and try to check the functionality whether it works. If it still doesn't work, then you go ahead and set business exception. So this is how it is done from UiPath Studio, is what I wanted to tell you. And also, before we go forward with our session, I want to set an expectation that we have a lot to talk about UiPath Orchestrator Queue, and it's my favorite topic. You can ask me to talk about it all day and I'll just keep on talking. But we have time limit, so I'll be touch basing only few points, Shripad, today. And rest of the points we'll cover in the next upcoming session, which are very interesting topics, which I think we have to touch base and we have to clear up.
Okay.
So that's it from my side in terms of exception handling.
Shripa. Okay. So yes, quite an insight received today, and it's really fantastic to know each and everybody's view on what is a business exception, what is a system exception, and how many retries are available for a system exception. That is 50. Minimum is 1 for BFSI. If you're working, then it is maximum or minimum 3 is what you need to look at. That is a good information, Nisarg. I think if we have covered the exception handling over here with regards to system and business exception, what is it next that you're going to cover in today's session? If you could touch base on that. If not, then we could take questions from the pack so that you could cover the other modules in the next session.
Sure. So I'll just before we go for those questions, I'll just execute my process once, and I'll show you how exactly a performer works and how we can check that in UiPath Orchestrator. So we have already added the data to queue. We have already executed the dispatcher, and you see I have already renamed it as a performer. So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to run the performer this time. I already have the data in my Orchestrator queue. So when I execute, as you can see, I have created a performer for RPA challenge where I'm adding all the data. And so I have set up a reference property, and that use of reference property I'm going to tell you in the next session. It is really interesting, and it's really one of the most useful feature of Orchestrator queue. Now here, due to reference property, I'm performing performer on only 4 data out of 8. So those 4 data transaction will be successful, and the rest still will be new, as it is done with the 4. As you can see, we can go ahead in the orchestrator queue, just refresh and go to view transactions, and you can see that only are those which I wanted to set as run has been successfully executed. And you can check the status by clicking on the view details and go to history. You can see that the status has been successful just a few seconds ago, and the data was added 30 minutes ago. In the inside the queue, when you click on view transactions, so these are all the statuses which you can see. And now I'm just processing it for only 8 items as of now, out of which 4 have been executed. And now everybody might be thinking that we can see all this data here, but how do we present this data, or how do we extract this data, or how do we know what exactly the transaction was and what was processed? For that, we have a feature where we can just click on export button here, and automatically a CSV file gets downloaded. Isn't this interesting, Shripad?
Yeah, this is what we were discussing some time back, Nisar, is because the clients keep asking that yes, you have processed the transaction items through the queue, which we can't see what you're doing. Okay,
Right.
but tomorrow we want to understand what has been processed, and can you give us some data point or some extract?
Right.
Why I'm closely relating to this is because in my earlier days when we used to run transactions as queues, uh, and that too the time when we were working on softmotive. Softmotive was very particular about control process robot, and that
Right.
is what they used to call. Okay, so we used to never get an extract. Unfortunately, what we had to do is we had to copy and paste every transaction that used to get processed at those early days. That was around 5 years back when I was working with software. Yeah, so that is how we were capturing in Excel and giving it to the customer. But the amount of revolution that has come up in today's technology is you process it and you get the entire gist out in an Excel, and all questions are answered. If you clearly look at the Excel sheet, it talks about your exception deadline. It talks about the retry numbers. Okay, and it talks about specific data that has been processed. So you don't need to look at doing a complete BI sort of activity when you're doing such queue processing. Okay, fantastic innovation provided by UiPath. If you guys are really using queues, try generating such reports and make it part of your PowerPoint presentations that go back to the customer on what is being processed and how it is being processed. Now that you've learned some new technologies and some new tasks, maybe you could use deadlines, maybe you could use postpone, maybe you could use retry numbers. To be very honest, the current trend line doesn't capture all these sort of task in the reporting. So if you guys are able to do it, that will really justify our teaching towards you. Okay, if you're able to justify it and if the client appreciates your reports, then yes, it's a good job done from our end. That yes, we are able to make you understand on how to use them. So fantastic knowledge shared, Mr. Totally appreciated.
Thank you so much, Shripad. So,
Yep.
as we have very less time, so I'll just quickly tell you guys that we will cover a lot of things which are interesting, where we have more functionality regarding queues such as SLAs, monitoring, downloading the JSON format, uploading, all these things. We are going to take up in the next session. We have how we can work with orchestrator queue triggers, which I'm going to touch base, which is the very latest feature in orchestrator in the next session. So I think Shripad, we are open for questions as we have very less time now. So we'll take only 2 to 3 questions, and those which we could not answer, we'll get back to you personally over your email.
Yeah, so guys, we are open to answer questions. I think Yasha, you had raised your hand. I'm sorry I missed out asking you. If you have any question, please type in on the chat and we'll be happy to answer it right away.
Yeah, I'll take a question, Shripad, here from Rohan, who has posted a question regarding, can you please explain difference between config sheet maximum retry and maximum retry of queue? So, so as per my understanding, Rohan, the question that you have asked is regarding RE framework, and the configuration file which you're talking is a configuration file from RE framework, if I'm right. So the configuration file has a maximum retry number, which always will be default to 1 if you are using UiPath Orchestrator queue. But if you're not using Orchestrator queue, then what you'll do is you are going to rename the retry number, change the retry number as per the transaction. So let's say if you are using RE framework without queue, that case you change the maximum retry number in configuration file to 2 times or 3 times when you're using data table or rows. But when you're using UiPath Orchestrator queue along with RE framework, that time you don't have to change the maximum retry number. You just have to change the maximum retry number in the queue, which is in the web view. I hope that answers your question.
Did you? I think.
So we have next question. We'll take up the quick next question, second question. Can you please explain the difference between when to use add and when to use add transaction and add get queue? Okay. So the difference between add transaction and add queue item. So add queue item gets the data of transaction from queue, but it does not change the status of a particular transaction. You know, it keeps the transaction status as new. It just pulls the data in a queue item. And now from queue item, you can utilize it as a transaction and then you can proceed with the data. But when you do add transaction item, that automatically changes the transaction status to in progress from new. So that is the main difference between add transaction, add queue item and add transaction item. Add queue item just pulls the data out of a queue. It pulls entire data and where you can automatically start working on the data. But the status of the data or transaction remains same. Wherein you are using add transaction item, it changes the status to in progress. So that is the main difference. Vaibhav. So last question, I have a question to sir. Can a queue item be reusable component? Means whenever whoever has to access, does it not need to load queue item every day? Yeah, I don't know who this question is from because it seems user. Queue item is a reusable component, yes, but once it is processed, once it is successful, you can't reuse it again. You have to change the status, and that can be done only by admin. And also, a reviewer can be set up on top of a failed queue transaction, which can be done only by admin, and the reviewer also can be set up only by those who have the access to it. So I will be delivering more detail on that topic in the next session. So join next session for more stuff. So we'll take only these many questions as we have limited time. So I'll hand it over to Shripad for further communication.
Fantastic, Nisarg. I think you can answer any question that is thrown by the community towards you. Often when I am reading this question, sometimes I start wondering, do I need to go back to the studio and check whether this particular thing exists? Fantastic. I really appreciate your knowledge, and I think I am blessed to work with you, man. It's a real pleasure to have you around. Thank you so much. Just a quick run, guys. Today we thought we'll make it quite an interactive session because we have been just talking and talking and talking, and we requested for feedback, and even that's been awaited. So that is how we trying to ensure that this session becomes more sort of an experience where we all contribute to it. So the next session would also be in a similar way, wherein we'll interact more with you so that you give your ideas and we could further drive the session towards it. Talking about CRG, this is like a regular one for me. CRG has a headquarter in Ottawa, Canada. We have around 4,000 plus customers worldwide, 30 years in business, and that's the amount of organizations that we are serving in India. Uh, if we're looking at our spread, guys, we are into data analytics, predictive modeling, machine learning, and also into RPA with automation anywhere and UiPath. So a rich experience sitting with us, wherein we can contribute to creating a COE with regards to RPA and also scaling up to hyper automation. The list goes on with the list of customers that are there with us. If any of you is looking out for any support with regards to COE building, or you're looking out for any help with regards to your development, we have a bunch of experts sitting with us who are ready to go ahead and help you and build a complete setup for you. Please keep on visiting us, reach out to us on our website as well as on the LinkedIn profile. Till then, please ensure that you stay home, stay safe, and thank you so much for your participation, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you all, and thank you, Nisarg, again. Good evening and cheers, guys. Bye.